Tim, thank you for coming today.
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
So,
Nice to be here.
So 10, is it 10 years this year?
Yeah, 10 years.
10 years.
we've been
It's
doing it.
nearly 10 years for me as well.
Yeah.
What are
I
we
know.
doing, Hi?
Yeah, well,
What?
just getting a little younger.
Yeah, and how has it been?
It's been good. I mean, it's actually 20 years. So I did 10 years in search and then 10 years in programmatic display.
Right.
And
But it's been 10 years of OpenX this year, though.
Yeah, 10 and a bit years.
All right,
Yeah.
congratulations. Round of applause for Tim.
Yeah.
Hi.
Cheers, guys.
That's a milestone.
Yeah. How many people use the OpenX open source ad server?
Everybody.
Yeah.
I use it.
If only we'd made a business out of that. Jeez.
Yeah, that's true, actually. I put my hand up because I did use the OpenX ad
Everyone
server.
did. There's
And
always
the
a story.
open
Nearly
source.
everyone's got a story about it,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's
The
history.
implementation was a complete disaster. All the
Yeah,
publishers
I know.
left.
Sorry
me, so,
about that.
yes. Nothing to do with your product. It was just down to my
Yeah, no,
incompetence
we
around
kind of left
PHP.
you up to it.
So yeah, this panel's about sort of the transparency piece around our ecosystem right now,
Yeah.
and there's a bigger opportunity as well in the ecosystem. Now, we alluded to that in the CEO panel there before the break, and I want to talk to you about that and sort of the progress we've made so far. You've been very, very vocal as a company and as a personality about the transparency piece in the ecosystem right now. How are we doing right now in terms of tackling this problem? Because we spoke before this panel on the phone about how sort of search went through its own sort of growing up pains, as Boris alluded to.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. So in terms of what programmatic is like right now, how is it sort of evolved in terms of the transparency piece?
Yeah, I'd put transparency and quality together because they're very closely related. And in some ways, I think we've made a lot of progress. In other ways, not so much. So on the good side, on the quality side, there has been a real movement to get rid of suspicious traffic, to get rid of invalid traffic, to help with brand safety. And a lot of that sort of started about 5 or 6 years ago, but has really kind of reached a new level in the last 2 years with the emergence of a lot of industry standards. And the reason the standards have been so important is, you can have your technology platform, your partners say a lot of things. Everyone made claims, and you rightly should be cautious of those claims unless they got SEC regulations behind them. But what makes those claims more solid is when you have the ability to independently verify them based on industry standards. So take ads.txt. Your partner says, hey, I work with all these guys. Do you really work with all those guys? Well, now you can go and look. Very simple way. Go and look in the ads.txt file. Oh, yeah, they're listed or they're not. Black and white. Same with tag, right? Tag is a very clear and actually pretty difficult set of standards to match up to for various aspects of quality with two standards. Self-attestation, which means I say I'm doing all those things. That's solid. Or I get a third party to come in and audit me and say, yes, they really are doing all these things like real-time filtration of every ad impression. Once you have that, you have a way to verify that the company you're working with or the companies you're working with are actually doing these things. And that's, of course, come to the UK with the IB Gold Standards, which is IB UK Gold Standards, which is kind of a roll-up of ads.txt, some elements of of tag, and some of the other pieces like better ads. So you can use that as a principle. When I say a principle, I mean a buyer or a seller, either the person with the audience or the person with the money. Okay, it's your guys' industry. Everyone, all of us folks in the middle, the technology enablers, are there to service you. And so you can now verify, hey, are my partners doing these things or are they not doing those things? So in other words, that has been significant progression in the last couple of years.
Do you think ads.txt has been a game changer in terms of like the industry coming together to actually tackle a real big problem?
I do. As I mentioned, I've been doing this for too long, 20 years. I've never seen a standard adopted that quickly. In the US, it got to about 60% of ComScore 1000 within a year. I think in the UK now you're at 40% of the top 500 domains already, and I know that some of those domains don't run programmatic, so it's not relevant. So that's pretty damn quick, right, for an industry to adopt that kind of standards and coalesce around it. So yeah, I do think it's been a game changer, and I think it's a good indicator that when the pressure's on, which it has come on the last 2 or 3 years, folks will say, you know what, we need to look beyond our own little petty rivalries, and we do need to go and push these. So I think it's happened. So that's good.
And the next set of evolutions, the .cert thing, do you think that would move things on as well. I mean, that
Yeah.
seems to be even a bigger project.
Yeah, so just to explain, so ads.txt is a way of authorizing that a given intermediary works with a domain. Ads.cert, which is still not done, like I think the next comment period ends in a couple of weeks, so it's not even like inked, is a way for a seller to digitally sign each bid request. And it allows a much more granular level of understanding of, okay, is this request exactly what it purports to be? So it's kind of another layer of validating and verifying that this stuff is real and it comes, it is what it says it is. So yes, I think if that works and it sticks, and people, it will be another great standard for people to swing in behind.
I've got a slide here actually.
Oh God, what have we got?
It's basically a talking about sort of where marketers are going to put their money, and they're actually talking about spending more money, or less money with the walled gardens, and more money with independents.
It's encouraging.
It is encouraging. So we're talking about transparency here, but we've decided that this year's conference is about about the positivity in the industry, right? And there's huge opportunity in all these new channels that are coming online. It's obviously it's taken 10 years for display, but now we're looking at the other opportunities. How important is it for us to get this transparency thing right?
It's crucial
For marketers to have that trust factor, because obviously P&G and Unilever went all out talking about the lack of trust, the lack of transparency in the ecosystem. How important is it for us to get that right?
And just to add, for instance, Mark Pritchard, who's a CMO of P&G, who laid down this very public challenge at the IAB, I think it was Miami a couple of years ago, came back the next year and said there has been an improvement, right? We have moved the needle. Not to say there's not more to go, but I think it is incredibly important. Here's why. We know, and other folks on the stage this morning spoke to it, we know that more and more of media consumption is going digital, and we know that the kind of big kahuna is CTV, right? That's where this huge part of the $600 billion industry we have is going to go to a fully digital experience. So that's one thing. We know that media is fragmented and going to these new experiences. We also know that with programmatic together, we've created a really good engine. Like the ability to atomically identify what a user's doing, what they may be interested in, present them with an ad, hopefully a more relevant ad, that's another topic we can talk about, with a relevant ad that creates interest for them. That's super powerful. If we want to take that engine and apply it to all of that new stuff that's coming on stream in the next 2 or 3 years, we've got to make sure that people believe and trust that engine, right? And that's this sort of 4-year journey that we're on. We're 2 years in. Some good stuff has happened, but we need to kind of finish. An example of some of the stuff we need to finish is we need to be really clear how these markets work, right? Boris mentioned a couple. We've had a few things over the last few years that have not been as clear as they could have been. Some hidden buyer fees, first pricing without it being fully disclosed, bid caching most recently. They're just all the examples of the same theme of just not being clear how the market works. So if we get the quality side down, we get the clarity on how the market works, we can let this engine that we're all participating in run at full steam and enter those new markets at full momentum, and then it's just going to go poof, it's going to explode in a good way.
So do you think we've done a good job as an industry to kind of like explain this opaque market we have? Like, because no,
not yet.
What do we need to do to articulate that to someone like Belinda, who's quite vocal on Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, we need to explain the basics of how.
She used FUCK quite a lot.
Fair enough. I would be frustrated too. Like, you need to understand how do bid requests occur. Boris just put on a slide. Like, bid inflation. Does that happen? Who does that? Who does it? One bid per request. Right, you need to explain how the auction works. Is it first price or second price? If the second price is running, how does that work? What do you do with the bid? Like, when does the bid run? And all of the quality stuff that we're already doing. So you just got to be clear. Everyone wants to know I'm playing a game, right? It's a two-sided market. It's a game. It's got rules. What are the rules? And then I'll optimize against those rules. I think if we get that sorted, we're gonna run like hell. And I'll give you a historical parallel. I mentioned I was in the search industry. Search when it started was actually much more contested than this industry. When some of you, anyone was in paid search in the early days, buying search, for the first 2 or 3 years.
Way up there, just one person.
Good, yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I must be older than most of you.
He is. Had to wheel him in there.
Yeah.
I think he can make him in crutches. I don't know.
early on, paid search was regarded as like immoral. Literally, it was immoral. The idea that
It
you
still is immoral.
Yeah. Well, we'll move beyond. It's not. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, right? It was really regarded as a bad thing, but it came. We sort of overcame that. We dealt with a lot of concerns about click fraud. There was a Business Week article, and this is when you had magazines. For all of you, and a black cover.
You're so old. You're so old.
So look at this
Magazines.
white beard. It's just it had a black cover and it said, the dark side of advertising, 2005, click fraud. Yahoo, us, and Google on there, and it's like, oh shit. And the good thing was that we had actually mainly solved the click fraud problem. We hadn't told people how it worked. We hadn't explained all the money that we took out in the front end, and we got through that really tough period. And at this point, search, who questions their search spend, right? If you're a digital marketer, you have a search piece, you have a social piece, and then, maybe you have a programmatic piece. But the search and social are undebated, right? It's $60 billion industry? No one questions it.
90 billion.
Oh, 90, there you go. All right, I'm out of date.
Yeah.
It's huge, it's super valuable, it works super well. It went through some of the same elements of the life cycle that we're going through. So having lived it, I know that you can get through this stuff if you do the right things. And that's one of the reasons, and it's not just me, some of my colleagues as well went through that cycle. That is one of the reasons why we have been pushy on this, because we've seen it happen, right? And so we have faith that it can happen again. So there's a little bit of evangelism and belief, hopefully, for you guys.
So talking about if we clean up our act, and there's consolidation around all of that, let's talk about what the industry looks like. We talked briefly there about the rate take in the last panel. So what do you think that sell side would look like in the next couple of years? Will it be a handful of partners globally, or how will it work out? Or is there room for more innovation? Because there's a general consensus, well, not general consensus, but there's a theme around commoditization, all the rest of it. All these guys do the same.
Yep.
So how does a company like OpenX, for instance, how does it stay differentiated? Like,
Well, so two questions there. So on sort of what does the industry structure look like? Couple of options, right? One is that you probably, and this is sort of happening, you can see this in ads.txt, kind of who's adopted and who isn't. That's a good way of looking at it. You probably have you have the big boys, and then you have 3 to 5 global scale platforms that participate in multiple screens and formats, right? And then you have some specialists. You're always going to have specialists. There's always a new ad format. There's always a new angle. So you have some specialists kind of complement the 2 or 3, well, if you include the Chinese players, like 5 or 6 massive guys, 3 to 4 big scaled independent guys, and then some specialists on the sell side. The interesting thing is, how does the sell side and the buy side relate over time? So there's a theory that over time, you need a full stack, which is you integrate the demand side and the sell side. That's a really interesting play, because if you think about it in the media principal world, Google, Facebook, all these guys, they all have integrated stacks, right? And it allows them to do a lot of things, allows them to be a lot more proficient with data, lower transaction costs, lower economics, because you're integrating. So that's an interesting question. Does that happen? You asked about consolidation, right? I don't know. It's a theory. It's a question. To date, the independent part of this sector has organized itself on the 2 sides of the market. I'm talking here about the technology providers. But that's partly a function of how the industry grew up, right? We all got our VC funding on each side of the house. We kind of stayed there. I don't know if that's going to remain. So it's something to think about.
do you think the buy side and sell side consolidate a little
Well,
bit?
there's some reasons to think about that, right? I mean, if you think about take rate, what is that? At the end of the day, it's a technology set of fees, taxes, whatever you want, what pejorative you want to call it. It's some costs that come from the technology providers who enable this industry to operate, okay? How do you get that cost down? Because over time, you want to become more efficient. Combining entities, combining components there does allow you to do that, right? Just as if you were to go the other way and separate out the layers even more, it probably gets more expensive, right? So a theory. Okay. How does second question, how does a company like OpenX differentiate? A few different things. One, all the stuff, quality, transparency I talked about. That's huge. Two, driving into screens and formats. So, we became a mobile-first company, I think, last year. That's become super important for us. Video's become very, very important. So becoming a cross-screen and cross-format business is very important to the buy side and some of the sell side. Not all the sell side has all of those. There's sometimes different markets. But the buy side wants to buy across all of those environments because it's the same user. I don't want to have to go and buy the same user 5 different ways.
But do you think a company like yourself can do all of those channels?
We already are.
Radio, audio.
I don't know about radio. I don't know a whole lot about radio. It's an interest. I'd say radio and audio is becoming very, very interesting. And we've done a bunch of work. The problem with audio, not radio, the problem with audio is currently it's locked up by Alexa, Google Home. Very much so. But there's other areas like Pandora and Spotify are kind of interesting. On CTV, I do think we have something to bear because we have scale, we have experience, we understand how the markets work. So there's angles in there. And I think the other thing is, increasingly thinking about the identity and data side. And Boris talked about that right at the end. I do think it's very, very important for us to club together. I'm also involved. I'm on the board of Axiom, which owns LiveRamp, which has been in the middle of a bunch of these identity initiatives. So I think that is an area where, alongside the quality stuff, the standards, the transparency, kind of group activity around identity is really, really important.
Yeah. And what about the ad server? Do you think is there any need for an ad server anymore? Ad server. I mean, that seems to be the sort of like.
I'll be brutally honest. Like DoubleClick kind of run the table on the ad server.
Right. You don't think that'll ever change?
I beat my head against that wall for many years.
Right.
It could in some of the new markets.
Right.
I think it's.
Well, in mobile first markets.
And also you look at. I mean, I think Talaria is doing a good job. With and Freewheel in the video space. Freewheel actually has a better position than DoubleClick in the upper end of the broadcaster market. So in the specialized areas, I think there's room. In the mass market kind of core,
Yeah, tough.
I know
space.
Brian took a run at it as well at AppNexus, but you can ask. It's hard. It's hard.
Why do you think connected TV seems to be talked about by everybody? Why do you think it's so important? Like, do you think that there's going to be an explosion of media companies in that channel that will need or require a sell side piece like you offer?
Well, here's why. So I think people can smell it. Now, I forget which gentleman talked about whether it was Brian or was it
RE2 maybe.
Yeah, no, probably a bunch of people talked about this early dip in subscribers and viewership in traditional and cable in the US, but also in other parts of the world. Actually, China is far more advanced. So 1 in 5 hours of TV viewing time in the US is already digital. In China, it's 3 in 5 already. So they're kind of way ahead. But I think if you look back to an industry like print, print in the 2000s was holding pretty steady. Go and look at the data. And then right around 2006, 2007, it starts tanking. And it starts tanking hard. And there's just no coming back. And it never came back.
It felt like it overnight.
Once it goes, it goes.
Right.
And I think the folks in TV, and there's more and more recognition of this within the principles, that time may be approaching. And when it happens, it's going to happen probably quicker than anyone would like. And so, I mean, for instance, most broadcasters now have some kind of programmatic team. So they're starting from 2 years ago, like, nah, it's not going to happen. Like, we're good. Everything's good. Rates are good. CPMs are good. Viewers are good. Now it's like, this might change. And when it happens, it's probably going to change more quickly. So why is it important? Because a TV experience is still the ultimate advertising immersive experience, right? It's a lot better than that shitty little picture on the page. Come on, let's face it.
No, listen, hey, that's wrong.
I mean, we like
that's
that.
Wrong.
We do like that. We
love,
make a living
love
of it.
display advertising here.
It's just, pal, what is advertising, right? The role of advertising is to create desire, right? Frankly, it's to make you want shit you don't need, right? So, did I say that?
No, hold on. No. What you meant to say was emotional connection,
Yes,
which
right.
allows
Because
you to.
It creates desire.
Exactly, to buy that shit.
Exactly. A lot of
That's proper attribution, by the way.
Yeah.
Just on stage, independent.
a lot of digital advertising basically for the first 20 years has been harvesting desire. Think about search, right? You generally know what you're interested in when you put in a search. You have, retargeting. You know what you're interested in. The real bleeding edge of digital advertising is how do we create desire, the front end of advertising, right? How do we create brands? And TV, whether it's linear or digital, is the most powerful way to do that. That's why it's why it's such a huge industry. It's the biggest single piece, and that's why as it very almost definitely moves in our direction. That's why it's got everyone super fired up to work out. How do we help these people form, consumers around the world form their opinions, shape desire, and then harvest that desire and drive preference and close the sale.
So to get to that 300 billion, though, we have to show that the marketers that we are a clean industry.
We have to show that we're worthy.
Yeah.
Right? And I would ask, anyone who's a principal in the room, whether you're a buyer or you're a seller, if you're not already, hold the technology companies to account. We have standards now, right? And the tech companies are, some more than others are saying they adhere to those standards. The way to drive the change, particularly I'd say the buy sides, because you guys have the money, hold the technology providers to account. Check their ads.txt files. Don't buy in-banner video. Look for those tag certifications and those third-party certificates. Look for those IAB gold standards in the UK. Look for those standards and hold them to account, because that's how we will shape ourselves in a form that can go and be successful in all these new and exciting sectors that are going to get much, much bigger.
Tim, I know we've run out of time. We could talk this for hours, but hopefully we'll see you here again in 10 years, and we'll have some wheelchair access on the stage, so we'll get you on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Tim.